Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Robots and the Retail Revolution. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it is a little early for some of you, so we certainly appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about automation in the retail space, quite a broad category touching everything from supply chain and logistics, warehouse, back of stores, front of stores, last mile delivery, and far beyond that, of course. We have some fantastic guests with us today, so I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting conversation. If this is your first time joining one of our InOrbit webinars, thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys taking the time. If you're not familiar with us, InOrbit offers a control and data management platform for robot operations at scale. We like to say we help robot makers develop, deploy, and orchestrate smart robots at scale. And with that, one of the sort of central things that's really integral to what we do is a dedication to effective robot operations, or robots, which is certainly something that is applicable to automation in all of its forms as it starts scaling and fleets get bigger. A little bit of housekeeping. My name is Jeff Chapman. I'm the content marketing manager at InOrbit. I'm just your MC, setting you up for today. Today's webinar will be 45 minutes long. We will be recording it. So if you have any of your colleagues weren't able to attend today, we'll be sending out a VOD after the fact, and you guys can share it with them to watch at their convenience. We will be taking your questions as well. So if anything comes up throughout the course of the webinar that you'd like to get more information on, please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and we'll circle back to them in the last 10 minutes or so of the presentation. And I think that is it. I think it's going to be a great time today. With that, I guess it's time to introduce your host for today's webinar. I'd like to introduce the CEO and co-founder of InOrbit, Florian Pestoni. Florian?
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I see Martin and I think Thaddeus should be joining us soon.
I don't see your camera, Florian.
Oh, you know what? I turned it on. Let me turn it off and on again. Sometimes that works. Did that work?
No, it did not, unfortunately.
This is classic. It was working 5 minutes ago, right?
Of course.
All
right,
you know what?
I'll leave you to it, guys.
Let's get the show on the road, and then I'll muck around with the camera in a bit. So we have two really great speakers today. I think my biggest challenge will be keeping this conversation to 45 minutes. So let me start with Martin. Martin Hitch is the CEO of Coros. Their focus is on the visible supply chain, so letting users find the areas that really matters, and then they do it with a platform that helps shippers and carriers reduce their shipping errors, and also improve on-time delivery using accurate and real-time data. But Martin, before Coros, has spent over 10 years just building companies using computer vision and AI and to increase visibility and decision-making in the supply chain. He was previously the co-founder and CEO at Bossa Nova Robotics, which really pioneered the use of autonomous robots to capture visual inventory in retail stores and process data at the edge and basically make restocking decisions for the supply chain. Our other guest speaker today is Thaddeus Segura, and he is the Director of Product for NextGen Inventory Management at Walmart, where he focuses on vetting and applying emerging technology to find solutions to in-store and supply chain challenges. I don't think I need to introduce Walmart, but maybe a little bit more about Thaddeus. He worked on the deployment of major robotics programs throughout Walmart, and has also studied data science at UC Berkeley, go Bears, with a focus on computer vision. So again, we're super lucky to have two fantastic speakers. Why don't I turn it to you if you want to add anything to this short intro before we get into the topic of retail robotics.
Sure. Firstly, thanks very much for having us. This is super exciting, and It's a little bit surreal not knowing what your audience looks like or how many people are in the audience. So hopefully we can at least share something that makes sense to people. One of the things I think, just to add to your introduction there, Florian, is with both Bossa Nova and Coros, one of the things that we look at is the detail. And with Bossa Nova, we used a robot to capture the state of inventory on retail shelves, right down to the individual SKU. And with Coros, we do the same thing, but tracking small parcel movement in the direct-to-consumer or B2B B2B fulfillment supply chain, but predominantly looking at packages that move through the carrier networks. In both cases, we use a very similar tech stack: high-res cameras, edge compute, remote connectivity, so that we can process image data right out on the edge of the network and make sure then that we're only transmitting the information that's needed. So two different ends of the supply chain for me, from right at the front of the store in the retail environment and the decisions that get made from that data, and now to the back of house where we're looking at fulfillment centers and saying, how do we make sure that the plan that a WMS system says this is what you're going to do today is actually executed against, and that's what Coros is doing, essentially auditing that information in real time, course correcting, providing course corrective actions as we go, and the whole goal, of course, is that you improve your performance and you increase your on-time delivery as well.
Awesome, and I think Florian, you did a great job of finding two people that have very similar experiences, because I started my robotics journey on the floor, working on technologies like deploying Bossa Nova, and now my focus has shifted upstream a little bit to the supply chain and the stores, really focused on visibility. So I think Martin and I's journeys are very in line, even time-wise. So excited to see how this conversation unfolds.
We appreciate the introduction.
Maybe in lieu of Florian, I could jump in with the next, at least written question. I'm sure Florian will be better at this, but that's okay. He'll call back in, I'm sure, as soon as he can. So apologies for this, guys. Why don't we start by just quickly setting the stage, if we can, where we are in the automation retail space. Thaddeus, I know you have been you've been seeing things unfold pretty interesting over the last 2-3 years. Consumer habits have changed, of course, with the pandemic more rapidly than ever. Can you sort of paint a picture for us of where we are right now in the retail space?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So the pandemic changed quite a bit, right? I mean, there's a dozen different things that I think we could really dig into, but there are always two that come to mind for me and that are probably relevant to this conversation. I think the first is that we saw like a rapid acceleration of omnichannel adoption. So the first 6 months of the pandemic, you saw people that suddenly couldn't go into stores, there were limitations, and so they started trying new ways of shopping. So people that had only ever shopped physically started doing, in-store pickup or full delivery, and so you saw probably a 3 to 5 year acceleration in those first 6 months of the pandemic. Simultaneously, we've seen major supply chain disruptions all over the place, and I think what's interesting is that the global supply chain is so connected now that a COVID outbreak at a, let's say, refinery could lead to us not getting our Easter outfits for 2023, because all these different pieces come together. And so we're starting to see the impact of those different things. And so I think that that's kind of where we're at today.
Okay, I'm going to just, if I can jump in on top of that as well, because the other thing I think that we've seen is a really significant shift in the labor market. And so with the acceleration, the pandemic has accelerated the e-commerce shopping trends. You have, I think there's another piece of this almost unreasonable expectation of how fast we should receive our product. And I think back when I first bought, I remember buying a Dyson vacuum cleaner about 20 years ago and online, and it showed up eventually, and I was ecstatic. It's like because it arrived and I didn't have to go to the store. And now I want it, if it's not there by the following day, I think there's a delivery problem. So I think we've had this unreasonable expectation, and then we've obviously had a significant shift in the labor pool. And I think back to our Bossa Nova days, where when we first introduced the concept of putting a robot in the front of house to scan shelves, we were frowned upon in some respects, because it was viewed as, you are taking away a role that we have for a full-time associate. And when I fast forward to now, there are so much, you know, the approach now is, we don't have full-time associates to even do those roles. And there is a symbiotic relationship between what you can automate and where the human still fits in the loop. And I think we might touch on that later on here. But that to me is probably the difference, where there was a little nervousness about how you would introduce automation alongside a human labor force. And now there is very much an understanding of, you need both. And there is a very symbiotic relationship between both. And it's about finding the fine lines for it. But no longer are we having to dance around it. It's very much like, you can do this really well. Our people can do this really well. Let's get the two to fit together. And it's now accepted. And I think that probably for you, Thaddeus, as well, means that you can accelerate an awful lot more. You can go so much faster when there is an understanding that we're not doing this maliciously. We're doing this to benefit everybody.
Yeah, Martin, I think you make an awesome point. And, you know, we obviously seen a lot of turnover in retail in general. And I think some people out there see people don't want to work, and I strongly disagree with that. I think people want to do meaningful work. But like, I know many brilliant engineers that want to solve interesting problems, but they hate doing their expenses, right? Because it's that mundane stuff that takes away from the interesting stuff. And I know the same thing is true of associates. Like, they don't want to do the boring things of repetitive, mundane tasks. They want to do the interesting things, the human interaction, the solving of problems. And so I'm excited because we recognize that now. And those mundane, boring, repetitive tasks are what robots are so good at. And so I'm really excited to see what the next, 5 to 10 years look like, because I think what we'll be able to do is automate some of that mundane stuff away to free up associates to focus on really interesting, engaging problems. So I think you nailed it there.
So thank you for filling the gap with my technical difficulties. It is 2022, but we still haven't quite figured this out. But maybe just to jump in, there's, as you know, at InOrbit, we work with automation across many different sectors. But what I see in retail and really throughout the supply chain when it comes to robotics and really different applications, we saw the jump in e-commerce, buy online, pick up in store, all of these new trends. And then some companies like Fast and others that are really, really pushing the edge, and sometimes going over the edge, as in the case of Fast. But really, there's a lot of innovation happening in retail, more so than in many years ago or over the last several years. So where do you see robots playing a role in that, whether it's consumer facing, sidewalk delivery or back of the store, but, closer to the last mile?
Yeah, I think there's one thing I want to touch on before I get directly to that answer, and I think that's an unforeseen impact of this omnichannel acceleration. So I think in that we have new problems. It's a double-edged sword, right? The model of a customer coming into the store to shop is almost like crowdsourcing your components of the experience. And so that's kind of like the ideal way to operate. But now we've had to go away from that because, to Martin's point, people want their merchandise, they want it now, and they don't want to do anything to get it. And so I think one of the problems that has manifested across all of retail is this need for unprecedented inventory accuracy. So in the past, you could get by with a little bit of margin of error. You could keep a couple extra items on the shelf. If your merchandise showed up a day late or 3 days late, it was okay. You might run out of a few items, but at the end of the day, you would ultimately be able to get by. And if you didn't have enough, a customer could make a substitution right there, given all the information they have in their brain. Now we have to find proxies for all those things. And so what has happened is that we now need like item level 100% inventory accuracy at all times and 100% visibility to what's going to arrive and when. And I think that one thing we don't talk about often enough when we talk about robotics is the accuracy unlocks you get from launching some of these programs. So everyone thinks about the labor savings, and that's obvious, but I think the biggest problem right now, even with everything going on with labor and everything going on with supply chain, is that we're now using these inventory levels, all of us, to display what's available to sell and buy online. And not just today, but also in the future. So it is critical that what you're going to get in is 100% accurate and is they're going to arrive 100% accurately on time, and that you know those things. And so I see that as the primary problem of, let's say, 2022 and 2023. And I think while we're solving that, some technology is going to continue to mature around LMD and all these other components. But that's, I think, in my mind, primary focus. Martin, you might have a different opinion.
No, I mean, I think that we've spent a lot of time, the supply chain has evolved to, so it's evolved up is the way I think about it, which is I had disconnected systems, I put layers on top of them, think Project 44, 4 kites, that sort of brought these systems together. Then we had, we have people like Flexport who are saying, let's go all the way back to sort of origin, and we can track across the ocean, onto trains, into a DC. So we've gone up and out. And your point is exactly right to me, which is, this is fantastic that we've got all this connected view. But to me, if you don't get in the weeds and get into that detail, you're aggregating inaccurate data. And only now, it's now time to go down. And you're speaking my language, because that's exactly what we focus on at Coros. It's like right down to the unit level and say, what is actually moving here, so that we can keep a track on the actual, not the forecast, and then upgrade everything from it. So like, if you can measure the data down at that level, then every system that sits on top of it should benefit.
And I think, when I hear to both of your answers, listen to both of your answers, I think the kind of the overarching theme there is the digitization. I mean, Thaddeus, you mentioned data, and I think, Martin, data is at the core of what you do at Coros, and I think the value of robotics as a data gathering mechanism is underestimated, as you said. But we talked a little bit about the kind of closer to the consumer at the other end, where you have warehouses and fulfillment centers. There's also a lot of innovation happening. I was at Modex last week, and there were some really amazing developments, both all the way from, let's say, trailer unloading. There's a few solutions there, to now pick and place and pick and pack is, come out of the research lab, and now you have robots with pick rates that are really amazing. So maybe, are you seeing some of this already succeeding or failing in the warehouse?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, to your point, there's definitely a maturity, like picking and packing, palletization, depalletization. A lot of these solutions are becoming really impressive, really fast, really agile, and have the ability to handle like really diverse products, not just cases, but some people out there handling bread successfully, which is really impressive in my mind. And so I think about those things, and I think about where they succeed and where they fail. And if I sit in a warehouse and I watch one of these machines work for an hour, it will inevitably get stuck. And it's fine on every case until it gets that one smushed case of ketchup or that's leaking, and it will try to pick it up and try to pick it up, and then ultimately it'll pause, and we'll have to go in and nudge it, right? And so when I look at that, there's two different ways you can approach that problem. Like on one hand, the engineer is like, let's just build a smarter machine. We'll create an object detection model to know this is damaged and this is a solvable problem. We just need smarter robots. But I think what's going to happen is that, in my mind, I think we're going to have this ecosystem effect where, when I think about it as a product manager, like, where did that error occur? Why did that case get smashed? And I'm willing to bet that there was a human in the loop somewhere that was unloading the pallet or loading another pallet on top of it. And so what I think will end up happening is that as we see this greater proliferation of robots, as we see more robots actually building these pallets, loading these pallets, unloading these pallets, that the error rate is going to come down, and that these machines are going to be able to work more successfully. Because I think in this robotics environment, you're going to have better digitization of signals, and higher accuracy and lower error rates, and they're all going to benefit. So I think right now we're seeing the pain of like having these siloed solutions of putting a robot in to do one specific task and then still having all the human error around it. But as we have more of these siloed solutions, I think the overall error rates are going to drop and all of the robots are going to raise their level of efficacy simultaneously.
So there's an interesting aspect here. You talked about humans introducing errors, but humans can also help out. You know, when the robots hit their limit of what they can do autonomously. So I do think that there's a very kind of like complementary relationship between humans and robots getting stuff done. I think maybe now is a really good time to talk a little bit more about Coros, Martin, and kind of zoom in on what you're doing to like improve the supply chain and the inventory and accuracy. You know, it's really very much the point that Thaddeus was making. Why are you taking this approach, and what was the pain point that you identified that Coros addresses?
So it was not dissimilar really to what we were trying to do at Bossa Nova, which was about if you have visibility right down to the SKU level. What the robot was very good at with Bossa Nova is understanding exactly what was happening on the shelf and where things were, whether they were in stock, whether they were out of stock, get right down to the item level. But to your point that you just made about the sort of symbiotic relationship with the human is we were great at finding out the problems, but we couldn't fix them. You know, and that's where the human in the loop for us was how do we take that data and make the associate on the ground more efficient, because if we can get that data into their hands in a very, very short period of time, then they can take the address the issues. We see a similar thing in the warehouse. And when we approached it here, we worked on the basis that I'm sort of smiling here because I had a conversation with a very large consumer products company recently, and I was told that the WMS was 100% correct. And I think if there's anyone in the supply chain, it's like no one has 100% accurate WMS. And I think when we look at like best-in-class supply chains, the facility performance operates at 99.4%. So these are the sort of SLAs that facilities are held to get, you know, orders out the door on time in full, you know, by a certain deadline. And that's an SLA. So that doesn't mean that we hit it all the time. So, you know, anybody that essentially claims more than that is essentially saying I've got the best supply chain in the entire world, because we know the one people that have right now. No disrespect to Thaddeus and Walmart, but when you own the marketplace and you own the last mile delivery vehicle and everything else that comes in between, you have an advantage. And I think
Martin, maybe just to make this more real. So even with 99%, which sounds really good, right? Out of 100,000 orders that you ship one day, 1,000 are wrong, right? Or have some issue, right?
Right. And it's simple stuff. It's like so when we looked at that, we said, okay, we know the WMS isn't right. We also know that WMS doesn't necessarily always talk to TMS. So there's a disconnection in the data, yet the two systems are still sending information backwards and forwards and saying, go do this. And what they're sending is the garbage in, garbage out exercise. It's like, I received this, I'm assuming that everything was executed flawlessly, and then every downstream process then happens from what I'm assuming to be flawless. And if you think about what happens with that is we create a bill of lading, for example, from that process and say, well, this is what's going on the trailer. Well, yet we already know the data is not accurate, which then says, I'm invoicing based on the bill of lading is registered against the PO. I'm invoicing against the bill of lading, and then I'm reconciling my invoice and payment with information that I already know is like highly unlikely to be accurate. Which is why we then get, you know, on the retail side, it's like, you didn't ship me everything that was on this list. You know, it's like, it's true. It's like, because there's error in the process inevitably. Yet we have, when I think about, you know, retail payment terms, you think about 60 days later, you get paid and someone says, well, you made a mistake on the shipment. We can't remember yesterday in the supply chain, let alone 60 days earlier when it was shipped and received. So when we looked at that, we said, well, if we can go down and track what is going on to the trailer, then that becomes the ground truth. And it was really about getting a single source of truth that of actually what was happening. So tell us what should be on the trailer. So the way that Coros does it is we just ingest a WMS manifest and say, we'll take your plan and then we'll upgrade it with actual. And we'll track everything out. We scan to an insanely high accuracy. And at that point, we can course correct on the dock door. So to bring it full circle to that, how do you work with the associates that we have on the dock door? Because we process right out on the edge, we're essentially running a comparison of this is what's meant to be on the trailer. Let me tell you exactly what's on the trailer. And I sound alerts down to the dock door. So I'm able to drive that alert and say, this is incorrect. We track a call just literally on Monday with one of our customers, and we were talking about the number of UPS packages that were being loaded onto FedEx trailers. And the minute that happens, that customer is not getting the package on time because there's not enough slack in the carrier network. There isn't enough time built into the carrier network to ever make up a mistake that happens at source. So things like that allow you to say, this is a UPS package, pull it off. And what we're finding is by us scanning, to Thaddeus's point, is that the robots are incredibly accurate. They're very good at those repetitive tests. And our device is the same thing. It's like that we're very good at identifying the information, but we need that relationship on the dock door for somebody to say, that's my signal to say this doesn't belong here. Let me put that on the pallet. That's my overflow. This is my error pallet. Let's put it on there, and then I can get the trailer loaded. And then in a similar vein, before that trailer is closed and launched, what have I missed? Because anything I've missed from that manifest is also going to miss the shipment commitment or the delivery commitment that I made down to the consumer. So do I have opportunity to correct again, pull the items that I've missed before that trailer gets picked up and moved? So that when we do that, what we view that piece of information as is the digital footprint of the package. So as the package moves, we have a representation of the package. It's time stamped. We know exactly, it has a unique identifier. And that information is what we then upgrade the WMS with. Say, this is now exactly what happened. So you can take now we get an accurate view as well as, here's my manifest. I'm operating at 95%. I'm operating at 97% because I now have hard data for exactly what went on there.
That's fascinating. And as you mentioned at the beginning, it's not a completely dissimilar problem to the one you were solving at Bossa Nova. Just all the way up the food chain.
Yeah.
And Thaddeus, tell us a little bit about some initiatives you're working with that you can talk about, and how that ultimately impacts the associates and the consumers.
Yeah, so only so much I can talk about since it is emerging technology. Of course, I think a lot of the stuff is pretty far out. Some stuff that's public is that I definitely think that we're leaning into some initiatives in last mile delivery. I made some public announcements around drone-based delivery in areas that it makes sense, and not just quad propeller drones, but actually linear flight. We've also made some announcements around RFID expansion and the idea of equipping more merchandise with RFID tags, significantly more, billions of tags a year. And so I think that, again, a lot of this goes back to a couple different problems. So when I look at the next few years, as I mentioned, I think 22, 23 is really around digitization of signals. And so you have technologies like RFID that will help us get there. And of course, extracting digital signals, to Martin's point. And then I think the next most pressing delivery, and I don't know if the technology will be there, is around last mile. And I think what the big unlock will be eventually is federally legalized full self-driving. I think we're a ways away from that because we have to actually deliver full self-driving and then get it approved. So I would love that that's the next problem we go solve. I don't think the technology and legislation will be there yet. So what we may have to do is pivot to solving some operational efficiency problems, which probably puts us back in stores with robotics. And so it's unclear what that's going to look like. But to answer the question, I think those are the big three things: digitization of signals in the immediate term, unlocking efficiency again, and then also last mile delivery and figuring out how to automate that. Still have a human in the loop, of course, for safety, but like take away the mundane tasks so they can accomplish what is interesting.
So that's changing the role of the store in the supply chain, and you do have some public announcements already around micro-fulfillment. So can you talk to that a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. I think the goal for any brick and mortar retailer is to figure out ways to use stores as fulfillment centers. When you have many stores, thousands of stores potentially, all throughout the country that are already near to the population, that carry millions of dollars of inventory, that's already well organized, it makes sense to start leveraging those places as fulfillment centers. And in some ways we already have, but it's a heavily, a very labor intensive process today, where there are individuals going out and grabbing each item from your order and putting it together, and then different people that are breaking that down or consolidating, and then different people walking it to the car. So just as I describe it, your mind is probably turning around all the different places that could be automated, and all these different steps that could be taken out, and how you can rethink space if you no longer have to both accommodate a human shopper and a person picking. And so I think what I can say is that we have a lot of space and a lot of stores and a lot of inventory that are already built and deployed, and that there is work being done around finding smarter ways to leverage those as fulfillment centers to give us a competitive advantage, especially in the heart of the country, which is a little bit harder to saturate because you don't have the same population density that you might have on the coast.
Florian, this is when we think about that, it's probably a good chance to sort of flip this conversation quickly and think about InOrbit's approach to automation, because we're talking about things here that need orchestrating. And when I think about our early relationship between InOrbit and Bossa Nova, and in full disclosure to any of the audiences here, we were one of the early customers of InOrbit. The belief that we had was we had no business focusing an engineering team on an element of our stack that wasn't driving the value. The value is driven through the data, and we needed somebody who could be the expert in managing the fleet of robots. And I think InOrbit to us was best in class there. And I think how do you see it? And like I think you and I talk about Modex, where there are arms everywhere suddenly. It's like 5 years ago, no one wanted to touch an arm because it meant there was a job. It immediately had the labor conversation. Now it's like, man, we need arms. So what's your take?
Yeah, thank you. I promise to turn the spotlight back to you, but one of the things that we see is that for all the efficiency that robots bring to the table, there's so much waste. There's so much reinventing the wheel. And really just going back a few years, if you were a robotics company, you kind of didn't have a choice but to build everything from scratch. And what we find is for a lot of companies, it is kind of like, it's not their core, right? And I think, Martin, you with Bossa Nova, you recognize what's core and what isn't. I think other companies are still trying to figure that out. But where we see a great opportunity is in bringing not just the tools, but also the best practices of what we call RevOps. And again, I come from the cloud space, so DevOps is what makes the cloud work at scale. And a lot of those practices haven't really quite percolated in the robotics world, where there's still, releases take, 6 months sometimes. And I think that's changing. And there are companies like InOrbit that are really facilitating, again, both the best practices and the application in the real world. And to the point about orchestration that you made, we're starting to get this more and more. We've been talking about this for a while, but now we get pinged almost every week by someone, like a large CPG company that we talked to said, well, we have these legacy AGVs that we've had for a while. Now we're adding AMRs. We're talking to this company that has a depalletizer. All these things have to work together. And the principle that most robotics companies have operated under was, well, I'm just going to worry about my piece of the world, right? But in the physical reality of a warehouse, for example, you're going to have many of these. Turns out warehouses have to be cleaned. Do you really want someone with a mop, or do you want an autonomous floor scrubber? And if you have a floor scrubber and you have let's say, one of these, cargo unloading, like trailer unloading solutions, if there's a truck in the cargo bay, that's not the greatest time for the floor scrubber to decide that they want to clean that area, right? So that's a pretty obvious one. And I think there are many more opportunities. I know there was discussion a few years ago about having shared docking for battery charging that different robots from different vendors could utilize. That makes a lot more sense than having, a parking lot of dedicated, chargers. So there's a lot of opportunity for thinking about this in a more systemic way, and thinking about not just how do I make this unique task a little bit better, but how do I run the overall chain more efficiently? How do I link all of these different automation technologies in a way that makes sense? And I'll say one more thing, which is the other area that I feel I share with both of you is, at the end of the day, it's all about data, right? It's how do you take the data, extract something useful out of it. So if you think about a robot navigating for like an AMR, it will generate terabytes of data per hour. Most of that you don't care about. It's used by the robot to, let's say, handle obstacle avoidance. When there's a problem, that data becomes super valuable. So you need to be able to separate. A problem might be, a not so bad problem, like could be, somebody, there was an obstacle and the robot stopped. Great, it worked as intended. We've also seen funny videos of robots dropping down escalators or into a fountain. So I think there's different levels, different severities of incidents, but being able to capture the data and learn from it, I think, is what's really valuable. All right, so let me turn it back to you, and then I think we only have a couple of minutes, and then we want to leave a little bit of room for questions at the end. So why don't I turn it over to you to what haven't we talked about that people should know that's happening in the world of retail and automation?
I mean, one of the things that's sort of interesting for me is when I think back to where we are today with Coros, and then I go back to the first designs of our retail scanning robot with Bossa Nova, is the evolution of the technology. And the camera systems that we started working on the best part of 10 years ago versus what's available today for a fraction of the price. The compute power that I can put out on the edge, the understanding as well from the entire ecosystem. So whether that's the customer as a Walmart, for example, of this is how the systems work now, and if I can get power to it, we know we can put enough compute out there in a really, really small footprint. Connectivity with 5G, we can move in quite a significant amount of data in a far more efficient way than we ever could before. And I think that will only continue to go in one direction. It's like we get more and more capable for lower and lower price. And I think what that does is it starts opening up much more. Sort of when Thaddeus and I were talking earlier about getting into the detail and getting into weeds, it's like the way that technology is moving, supply chain issues aside right now, but the way that the technology evolution is going is it will enable us to just do more and more and more, because suddenly things will become cost effective, and there'll be an ROI to justify, tracking a piece of the supply chain that today we can look at and say that's, we can't get a return on that. But people were saying that, 10 years ago, we couldn't get a return on a robot in a store, and there's half a dozen companies putting robots in the stores. We couldn't get a return on automating the, a floor cleaner, but to your point, it's one of the easiest things to actually do. It's not trying to do anything that's mission critical at that point and data critical. It's really just trying to keep out of people's way while it moves around. If you think about that, and so I think that to me is going to be the interesting point as the entire ecosystem evolves. It's really what we can do with with the newly available capability that is driven through individual technology developments.
Yeah, I totally agree with Martin. One thing I want to add is just the importance of building properly modularized solutions. If I think about things like computer vision, the models are 10 years old. I mean, at the oldest, the first model we saw, AlexNet 2012. And now, where these things have come in the last even 3 years with object detection, the frames per second, the accuracy, the things that we can do now versus a few years ago are incredible. And so what is 2022 going to bring in 2023? And then the importance is, if you've built this non-modularized solution, this whole end-to-end solution, then you just want to change out a model, you're going to have a really hard time and you're going to get left behind. And so to Martin's point, things are going to continue to evolve and adapt, but I think there has to be some cognizance around how you're designing your system so that the pieces that are modularized, the pieces that we do think the technology is going to advance rapidly, you can just quickly interchange those without having to rebuild your entire stack. Because I think the people that do that right are going to have a lot of flexibility and agility. The people that do that wrong are going to get locked into a legacy system with 10-year-old models. And I wouldn't want to be running AlexNet in 2022. It was incredible at the time, but you have to have the flexibility to adapt beyond that.
Hey guys, sorry to jump in, but we are actually almost about to hit our wall, and I wanted to see if I could at least get one question in here. And for anyone who did ask a question in the chat, if we don't get a chance to answer it, of course we'll circle back with you guys afterwards, not to worry at all. I think we have time for one here. Thaddeus, I wanted to ask you about, you talked a bit about operational efficiencies, and I'm wondering about sort of, the human in the loop. It's not just about working alongside, it's about working together, right? And that's the ultimate goal here. So can you talk about sort of scaling sort of the education of associates, how that's been going? Are associates, as you start to move into scale, is it working? What's not working? How has that been working for Walmart?
Yeah, Jeff, I think that's an awesome question. I don't know who answered it, but it's an awesome question, because what I worked on in the past was change management with the associates. And it's a huge problem. I think that there are translation problems all throughout the entire development of robotics and the deployment, where you have brilliant people like Martin and his team developing these incredible robots. And then you have people like us in the stores who know what the problems are, but we're trying to communicate those to Martin, and then we get something built. And then you give it to an associate that doesn't have any of that understanding and has to interact with this robot on a daily basis. And so, to be 100% honest, we haven't cracked the code. And I don't think anyone has yet. It is a major pain point, and there are things that there is some training you may have to do. Yeah, to be honest, I don't think we've answered it. I do know of some people that are actually having their frontline associates, let's say, annotate data for some specific models, and I love that idea. The people working with these things are actually the people going in and labeling object detection models. And I love that, because it's not that complicated, and they are the subject matter experts. And so I think that having confidence and having faith in your associates is going to be key to the solution. But I think that, to whoever asked the question, it is an unanswered problem. That we do have to get smarter about how we're educating the people working alongside of these things, and really boil down what is important for them to know and empower them to basically take those actions.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, Jeff, because we saw this at Bossa Nova, we see it with Coros now, which is people just want to know what's going on. And if you take the time to explain how any of this technology helps and how it can help them individually, I mean, this is what I think is the key thing, is that we sit up here with you know, this is our process, and this is how we can change it, and this is how this can interact, and then we get all this downstream opportunity. And often we forget we're interacting with somebody right down in at the sharp end. You know, it's like these are really tough roles that you're interacting with. And we see it with Coros now. We saw it with Bossa Nova as well. We went in and said, hey, this is what it does, and this is how it works, and this is how it helps you. Nobody is. We went from this sort of friend. It was a friend or foe conversation. Initially, we were a foe. It's like, what's this thing going to do, and how's it going to affect me? And when we took the time to engage and explain, then we became a friend. It's like, oh man, it's going to do the thing I hate doing, and it's going to make me even better. And it's like, and often we forget that there's a human touch in here to just take the time. And you know, as Thaddeus said, it's about educating, but it's really educating right down to the role level and say, this is how it's going to make it, this is how it'll help you and how it helps us and why we're doing it. And I think people just want to understand the context of, where do I fit in the great scheme of things? How do I fit in with this new piece of technology? And if you explain that, the immediate embracing is pretty magical. You know, when you, because what we are trying to do at the end of the day is get away from the horrible stuff. You know, all of this automation is pinpointing things that nobody really likes doing, but we get protective over it when we don't understand. And I think when we start explaining it, you get this embracing of, oh, that's okay. And that, in fact, that's even better. It's like, so I think we need a human touch with all this automation, which is a key thing.
Oh, that's awesome. Fascinating conversation, guys. And thank you so much to everyone for sticking around for a minute or two over time. We've hit our wall, unfortunately. I know we'd love to keep going, but I'm afraid this is the end of our time today. So I wanted to thank you all once again for joining us here. Again, for any of the attendees, thank you for staying a little bit late. We will send out a video of today's webinar for you to follow up on and watch again at your convenience, or share with your friends and colleagues as you'd like. And of course, if you'd like to know more about us or any of our amazing guest speakers today, feel free to reach out and we can certainly connect you. So thank you once again on behalf of InOrbit. I will wish you guys a great rest of your day. So long, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.